When the war finally ended, Europe's scientists got back to work. On the 6th of November 1919, a group of them hurried to Burlington House in London. They had come to hear the findings of a major expedition led by the British astronomer Arthur Eddington. Eddington was convinced that Einstein's theory of relativity was correct, and on the 29th of May he had travelled to a remote West African island to prove it, by photographing a complete solar eclipse. Einstein had predicted that a massive object like the Sun would bend space and therefore light. If Einstein was wrong, the eclipse wouldn't change the position of the stars around the Sun. But if he was right, the light from those stars would be bent and their position would appear very fractionally to have moved. The Royal Astronomical Society owns some early copies of Eddington's original photographs, positive images printed onto glass plates. People often think of science and art as being different, even opposite endeavours, but this photograph is among the most artful I've seen in a long, long time. It has a simplicity and a clarity that is just exquisite, and it repays close inspection. Down here there is a huge solar prominence, perhaps 300,000 or 400,000 kilometres long, that has been captured at the very moment it leaps off the surface of the Sun. It is almost like a Lartigue freeze frame, only on cosmic scale. But its scientific value far outweighs its aesthetic value. You can just make out, in the darkness of space, some stars. Now, Eddington and his team compared the position of those spots of light with another photograph of the same spot without the Sun, and they found that they had indeed been bent by just a few thousandths of a degree by the gravitational force of the Sun. And in doing so, they helped confirm that Einstein's theory of relativity was correct. These photographs catapulted Einstein to fame, and his own photo emblazoned the front pages of newspapers all over the world. It did so in part thanks to another crucial innovation in visual culture. In the 19th century, most newspapers and magazines didn't contain many photographs, but towards the end of the century, a new method was invented. The halftone process converted photographs into thousands of different sized dots, which made them cheaper and easier to print than ever before. And by 1919, newspapers and magazines were full of photographs. The halftone process transformed the fabric of people's lives, bringing countless images into the public's homes and hands every single day, fueling their voracious visual appetites. And even in our computerized age, its legacy continues. Those half-tone dots being the prototype for digital pixels. Back in 1919, the half-tone process splashed Einstein's face across the front page of a prominent German newspaper that was read by many Berliners. None was more impressed than a young artist called Hannah Höch. In 1919, Höch was working at the largest publishing house in Berlin, the very firm that published that famous portrait of Einstein. She couldn't fail to be inspired by the imagery around her. In 1918, she started to leaf through the many publications that were lying around her office and cut out any image that interested her. She would then stick them next to other images to create striking, amusing, unsettling juxtapositions. And she called her method fotomontaje.
Höch had created a new visual language, and she used it to shock and unsettle her audience. She distorted and disfigured her subjects, creating disjointed, elusive narratives that condemn the dysfunctional politics of Weimar Germany and the objectification of its women. Höch's first major work was the concisely titled Cut with the Kitchen Knife Dada Through the Last Weimar Beer Belly Cultural Epoch of Germany.
This piece was made in the winter of 1919, a tumultuous period in German history. There was inflation, there were food shortages, there were recriminations and assassinations, there were communist uprisings and nationalist uprisings. It was, quite frankly, chaos. And so too is this image. And at first sight, it is so busy and so complicated that it doesn't make any sense at all. But there was method in this madness. The top right corner, this contains the German establishment, the so-called beer belly brigade. And at the heart of that zone is the heart of the establishment, the Kaiser himself, Kaiser Wilhelm II, whose right eye has been replaced with a baby and whose moustache has become the legs of a wrestler. Now, this whole top right zone is a very masculine zone. There are government ministers, there are top hats and bowler hats, there are machines and cogs and wheels. There are aeroplanes, which of course excited men so much in this period. And there are, of course, guns. I see this zone as a searing indictment of masculinity, saying, men, you got us into this mess. Then, if we travel to the bottom half of the image, we see the female side of the story. So down here, this is a map of all the countries in Europe who had already given women the vote or were about to give women the vote. Germany had done it that very year in 1919. And just at the top left of it is a small, almost invisible, faded black and white photograph of Hannah herself. And I wonder if she's saying that women are going to bring about the revolution that Germany so desperately needs. There are, of course, other revolutionaries here. There is Karl Marx and there is Lenin. But over here is perhaps the greatest revolutionary of them all. He's got the biggest face in the entire picture. That is Albert Einstein. She obtained that photograph from the Berlin newspaper that was published by her own company shortly after the theory of relativity was verified. Just as he was ripping apart traditional understandings of physical reality, so she was ripping apart, quite literally, traditional understandings of image making.
Hannah Höch's photomontages created an aesthetic that never went out of fashion. Her disruptive imagery went on to inspire many artists and graphic designers, and was famously appropriated by satirists and comedians. But above all, her works captured the mayhem of their own times. Other modernist art forms were doing the same thing.